I never imagined my graduate art history degree would lead me to the boardroom of Luminance Gallery, the most prestigious art institution in Chicago. But there I was, looking at my name, Olivia Chen, etched on a gleaming brass plaque. Director of Acquisitions and Exhibitions. Even more surreal? The moment I spotted Jason, my ex-husband of 5 years, staring at me from across the atrium. The same man who'd embezzled nearly $350,000 from our joint accounts to impress Veronica, his 24-year-old art student, before abandoning me with nothing but debt and divorce papers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. He smirked when he saw me, assuming I was just another new hire touring the gallery. But his smug expression evaporated when I walked confidently toward the executive wing, not as some assistant, but as his new boss, the woman who now controlled every exhibition he'd ever hoped to curate. Stepping through the magnificent glass doors of Luminance Gallery, I felt my heart quicken, not from anxiety, but anticipation. The security guard handed me my temporary badge, and I traced my fingers over the simple words, New Employee Orientation. If only Jason knew what that orientation really meant. 6 months ago, I discovered my husband of 5 years had been living a double life. Not only had he been having an affair with Veronica, his graduate student, but he'd also been systematically draining our accounts to fund lavish trips, expensive gifts, and even a down payment on a lakeside condo I knew nothing about. The night he left, he casually mentioned the $350,000 debt he'd hidden from me as if it were nothing more significant than a coffee stain on our kitchen counter. "You'll never survive this financially, Olivia," he'd said, tossing his wedding ring onto our dining room table, the same table where we'd once planned our future together. "You're too idealistic for the art world. Always have been. You're brilliant with art theory, but you lack the instinct for the business side. You'll be buried in paperwork at some university while real players make history." Now, as I adjusted, my tailored navy blazer in the elevator's mirrored walls, those words fueled rather than haunted me. The woman reflected back at me was different from the one Jason had abandoned. Her eyes held determination, and her shoulders carried the confidence of someone who'd turned devastation into resolve. "5th floor," the elevator chimed pleasantly. I stepped out into the bustling corridor of Luminance's executive level. Various employees hurried past, some casting curious glances my way. They'd been buzzing about the mysterious new director of acquisitions for weeks, though only the board knew her identity. I caught fragments of whispered conversations. "Did you hear about the morning meeting? Something big's happening at 10 Oak. Jason's been impossible all week." Perfect. The rumor mill was already churning, creating exactly the atmosphere I'd anticipated. I made my way to the HR department where a cheerful woman named Elena greeted me. "Welcome to Luminance. You must be our new hire. Let's get your orientation started." She winked knowingly, one of the few who knew my true position. Through the glass walls of the break room, I spotted him. Jason stood in his office, commanding attention from his curatorial team with that familiar, arrogant stance. His designer suit and perfectly styled hair screamed of success, but I knew better. He'd built his reputation on borrowed insights and stolen credit. "Olivia?" A voice startled me from my observations. "Olivia Chen?" I turned, maintaining perfect composure as Jason approached, his signature smirk playing across his lips. "Well, what a surprise," he said, eyes narrowing slightly. "Finally decided to join the commercial gallery world?" "Jason," I replied coolly, noting how his wedding band had been replaced by an ostentatious signet ring, probably bought with stolen money. "I didn't expect to see you here." "That's Mr. Reynolds in the office," he corrected, straightening his Italian silk tie. "I'm head curator of modern collections, and you," he glanced at my temporary badge, his smirk widening, "are in orientation. Well, Everyone has to start somewhere. Nearby employees pretended not to listen, but their typing had suspiciously slowed. I smiled politely, letting him savor what he thought was his moment of superiority. The antique clock on the wall showed, "Dos bam." In exactly 15 minutes, everything would change. "I'm looking forward to the morning meeting," I said casually. "I hear there are some interesting announcements planned." A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "Good. Let him wonder." "New hires don't typically attend executive meetings," he said, his voice carrying that familiar, condescending tone. "Exceptions can be made," Elena interjected, appearing at my side. "In fact, Olivia needs to head up now. The board is waiting." Jason's eyebrows furrowed slightly. "The board?" "Don't worry, Jason," I said, gathering my portfolio. "Everything will make sense very soon." As I walked toward the executive conference room, I could feel his eyes following me. The weight of my real employee badge, the one announcing me as Director of Acquisitions and Exhibitions, felt heavy in my blazer. Pocket. In my briefcase lay the documentation of every questionable acquisition Jason had made, every artist he'd underpaid, every exhibition he'd claimed sole credit for when others had done the conceptual heavy lifting. The board had been quite interested in my detailed analysis of the department's vulnerabilities, particularly given my unique insight into the man running it. They'd been even more impressed by my proposals for restructuring and my track record of elevating overlooked artists while still maintaining commercial success during my time at the Whitney Museum. The conference room doors loomed ahead, and through the glass, I could see the board members assembling. They nodded respectfully as I approached. Behind me, I heard Jason's expensive shoes clicking on the marble floor. He'd followed, curiosity apparently getting the better of him. "After you, Mr. Reynolds," I gestured to the door, my voice carrying a hint of authority that made him pause. The next 15 minutes would change everything. The carefully constructed facade Jason had built would crumble, just as he'd once shattered my world. But unlike him, I wasn't here for destruction. I was here to rebuild, not just my life, but an entire department that had suffered under his self-serving leadership. As we settled into the conference room, my mind drifted to that devastating night 6 months ago. The memory was crystal clear, standing in our kitchen, staring at bank statements and credit card bills I'd never known existed, listening to Jason explain how he'd invested in his future, a future that apparently included his young student and a condo I was unknowingly paying for. The chairman's voice snapped me back to the present. "Before we begin, I believe we have some introductions to make." He smiled warmly in my direction. "Ms. Chen, would you like to do the honors?" I stood, smoothing my blazer with steady hands. The fear and helplessness I'd felt that night in the kitchen had been replaced by a calm certainty. Jason sat across from me, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning realization, as I pulled out my real employee badge. "Thank you, Chairman. Blackwell." For those who don't know me, I'm Olivia Chen, your new Director of Acquisitions and Exhibitions, and we have some serious changes to discuss. The sharp intake of breath from Jason's direction was just the beginning. The real work, transforming Luminance's curatorial approach into something worth being proud of, was about to begin. The atmosphere in the conference room brought me back to that rainy Friday evening 6 months ago, the night my world imploded. I'd been working late at the university, celebrating quietly after finalizing a groundbreaking research paper on overlooked female abstract expressionists. My phone had buzzed with a text from May, my closest friend since our undergraduate days. "Olivia, we need to talk. It's about Jason. Meet me at Cafe Luna in 20. The concern in her message seemed odd, but May had been my closest friend since our days at Northwestern. If she was worried about Jason, it had to be important. I'd grabbed my umbrella, telling myself the knot in my stomach was just anxiety about a potential problem with my husband. I found May at our usual corner table, her usually animated face somber, hands wrapped around an untouched cappuccino. The moment our eyes met, I knew something was terribly wrong. "I can't do this anymore, Olivia," she'd whispered, pulling out a stack of papers from her designer bag. "I found these in Jason's office at the university last night. You need to see them." My hands trembled as I spread the documents across the table. Credit card statements, loan applications, bank transfers, all in my name but with transactions I'd never seen before. The numbers blurred before my eyes. $78,000 charged to a credit card I didn't know existed, $125,000 in personal loans, multiple cash advances, a second mortgage on our house. "There's more," May's voice cracked. I saw him, Olivia, with one of his students, Veronica Winters, at the lakeside property listed in these documents. They were—" She stopped, unable to finish. The cafe's ambient noise faded to a dull roar. My cappuccino sat untouched, growing cold as May detailed everything. The secret meetings, the expensive gifts, the promises Jason had made. Each word felt like another brick being added to the wall crumbling down around me. "He told her you knew about the loans." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. May continued, tears streaming down her face. "He said you'd agreed to invest in his career, in his private collection. But last night, I found these." She slid more papers across the table. "He's been forging your signatures, using your excellent credit score, building this whole house of cards on your academic reputation. The final document made my blood run cold. A lease agreement for a luxury condo in the city's most exclusive lakefront district, signed 2 weeks ago. My name was on it alongside Jason's, but I'd never seen it before." "He's been planning this for over a year, Olivia," May admitted, her voice barely audible. "The condo. It was supposed to be their fresh start once he left you, but I couldn't. Not I couldn't be silent anymore. You're my best friend." I'd sat there, numb, as the reality of my situation sank in. 5 years of marriage, a friendship with May spanning 15 years, all built on lies and manipulation. The numbers danced before my eyes. $350,000 in hidden debt, carefully accumulated over the past 3 years. Driving home that night, my mind raced through all the signs I'd missed. The late nights working, the mysterious business trips, the way Jason had insisted on handling all our finances, claiming he wanted to protect me from stress. His constant reminders that I was too idealistic, too academic for the real art world. I found him in our home office, calmly packing files into his briefcase. The sight of him, so composed, so unbothered, made something snap inside me. "Were you ever going to tell me?" My voice sounded strange, even to my own ears. "About the debt? About Veronica? About any of it?" He looked up, and for a moment I saw surprise flicker across his face. Then his expression settled into that familiar patronizing smile. "Ah, May finally grew a conscience, did she? $350,000, Jason. In my name. Don't be dramatic, Olivia. It's just business. Art requires capital, and your credit score made everything so much easier." He'd continued packing as if we were discussing something as mundane as grocery shopping. "Besides, you never cared about the financial details. Always happy to let me handle everything. So trusting. So naive. I trusted you because you were my husband. And that trust built us a beautiful life, didn't it?" He gestured around. Our expensively furnished home. The house, the art collection, the trips to Venice and Basel. "Did you really think your associate professor salary paid for all this?" The magnitude of his betrayal hit me in waves. Every luxury I'd thought we'd earned together had been built on lies and stolen credit. Our entire life had been a carefully constructed facade. I've already moved most of my things to the new place, he continued, straightening his tie in the mirror. You can keep the house, though. Good luck making the payments with the new mortgage. Maybe this will finally force you to move beyond your comfortable academic theories and into the real world. The art market doesn't reward idealism, Olivia. I tried to teach you that. He tossed his wedding ring onto the desk, a final, calculated insult. You'll never survive this. The debt, the legal battles, the commercial art world. You've always been too idealistic, too principled. Always have been. The sound of Chairman Blackwell's voice pulled me back to the present moment in the conference room. Jason sat across from me, still radiating that same arrogant confidence. He didn't know that his words that night hadn't broken me. They'd transformed me. In the 6 months since he'd walked out, I'd launched myself into an intensive investigation of our finances. Every transaction, every forged signature, every hidden account laid bare. I discovered that Jason's investments were a web of self-dealing and exploitation, many involving Luminance Gallery clients and artists. The same skills that had made me a successful academic, attention to detail, pattern recognition, theoretical analysis, became weapons in my arsenal. I'd tracked down artists Jason had underpaid, built a comprehensive case, and presented it to Luminance's board along with my proposals for departmental reform. They'd been impressed not just by my discovery of the irregularities, but by my strategic vision for preventing similar situations in the future. The position of Director of Acquisitions had been created specifically to implement these changes. Looking at Jason now, his expensive suit bought with stolen money, his new signet ring probably purchased on credit, I felt neither hatred nor fear. Those emotions had been transformed into something more powerful: purpose. The chairman was distributing folders containing my analysis of the department's vulnerabilities and my proposed solutions. Jason's face grew increasingly pale as he flipped through the pages, recognizing his own transactions laid bare in meticulous detail. Ms. Chen, Chairman Blackwell said, perhaps you'd like to begin by discussing the irregularities you've discovered in the Modern Collections Department's acquisition practices. I stood, my voice steady and clear. The woman Jason had dismissed as too idealistic had become his reckoning, and his education in true art ethics was about to begin. The transformation from victim to victor hadn't been about revenge. It had been about justice, reform, and proving that integrity and strength weren't mutually exclusive. As I began my presentation, I saw May's name among the meeting attendees. She'd recently been hired as Luminance's Community Outreach Coordinator, her own journey of professional growth paralleling mine. Jason's carefully constructed world of artistic manipulation was about to change, and I would be the architect of that change. The debt he'd left me with had become the catalyst for a transformation neither of us had seen coming. These irregularities, I continued, standing at the head of the conference room, represent just the surface of what I've uncovered in the Modern Collections Department. I clicked to the next slide of my presentation, watching Jason's face grow increasingly ashen as his questionable practices were laid bare before the board. The spacious conference room on Luminance Gallery's 5th floor had become an arena of silent tension. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the morning sun cast long shadows across the polished walnut table where 15 of the institution's most influential figures sat transfixed by my presentation. I noticed Catherine Diaz, head of human resources, taking detailed notes. She'd been instrumental in my hiring, recognizing the need for systemic change in the gallery's oversight procedures. Her dark eyes met mine with quiet approval as I detailed the next set of findings. In the past 24 months alone, at least 11 emerging artists were significantly underpaid for their works, I explained, bringing up a detailed spreadsheet. Each transaction technically legal, but ethically questionable, designed to maximize gallery profits while minimizing artist compensation. Some of these artists were told their works were selling for half of the actual sale price. A sharp intake of breath came from Marcus Way, Chief Financial Officer. His reputation for financial integrity was well known in the art world. And these were all handled by— His voice trailed off as he glanced at Jason. By the department. Head of Modern Collections, I confirmed, my voice steady. Mr. Reynolds's signature appears on every contract. Jason shifted in his leather chair, his usual confidence cracking under the weight of evidence. These were all standard industry practices, he interjected, attempting to regain control. Every gallery operates on similar margins. Interesting. You should mention standard practices, I replied, clicking to the next slide. Notice the discrepancies between the prices reported to artists versus those reported to collectors and the IRS. I approached the screen, pointing out subtle inconsistencies. Several artists have confirmed they never saw these final sale numbers, let alone received their contracted percentage of these amounts. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. Through the glass walls, I could see curious employees gathering, drawn by the unusual length and intensity of the morning meeting. Among them stood May, her face a mixture of resolve and vindication. Our eyes met briefly. She'd provided crucial information about Jason's methods, part of her own journey toward professional integrity. Ms. Chen, Victoria Lambert, the senior board member, leaned forward. Your analysis is thorough, but what's your proposed solution? Luminance's reputation is at stake. This was the moment I'd prepared for. I opened my portfolio, distributing comprehensive reform proposals to each board member. A complete restructuring of the acquisitions process, I began. New oversight protocols, transparent artist communication channels, and a revolutionary pricing and commission structure. As the board members flipped through my proposal, I could feel Jason's glare intensifying. He'd severely underestimated the woman he'd dismissed as too idealistic for business. Each page of my proposal dismantled the system of exploitation he'd built, replacing it with structures designed for transparency and ethical practice. Implementation begins immediately, Chairman Blackwell announced, closing his copy of the proposal. Ms. Chen will oversee the transition as Director of Acquisitions and Exhibitions. Mr. Reynolds, you'll report directly to her during this restructuring period. Jason's expensive pen snapped in his grip, sending tiny drops of ink across his crisp white shirt. This is absurd, he sputtered. I've run Modern Collections for 3 years. You can't possibly— Your methods have exposed Luminance to significant liability. Victoria Lambert cut in. Ms. Chen's appointment isn't up for debate. The board's decision is unanimous. The next hour unfolded in a blur of discussion and planning. Department heads asked questions about the transition while Jason sat in seething silence. Outside the conference room, word was spreading rapidly through the office. I could see employees huddled in small groups, smartphones in hand as the news traveled through informal channels. Finally, Chairman Blackwell closed the meeting. As members filed out, many stopped to welcome me officially, their handshakes firm and approving. Jason remained seated, staring at my proposal as if trying to find a loophole, an escape route. Mr. Reynolds, I said, gathering my materials, I'll need a complete audit of your current artist contracts by tomorrow morning. My office, the corner office you're currently using, will need to be cleared by end of day. He looked up, his face a storm of emotions. You planned this, he accused quietly. All of it. No, Jason, I replied, keeping my voice professional. You planned this the day you decided to forge my signature on those loan documents. I'm just implementing the consequences. As I left the conference room, Catherine Diaz fell into step beside me. Security has been notified, she murmured. They'll supervise Mr. Reynolds' office relocation. His new workspace is ready on the 3rd floor. I nodded, watching the office dynamics shift in real time. Employees who had once scurried away from Jason's approach now stood their ground, their postures straighter, their expressions more confident. The culture of fear he'd cultivated was already beginning to crack. My temporary badge had been replaced. With my official credentials. Olivia Chen, Director of Acquisitions and Exhibitions. The weight of it felt right against my blazer, a tangible symbol of transformation. Through the glass walls of what would soon be my office, I could see Jason roughly packing his personal items, his movements angry and jerky. Olivia, May approached, hesitantly, holding a stack of files. These are the community outreach proposals you requested, and I want you to know the team is ready to support your changes. We've needed this for a long time. Looking at her now, I saw neither my former best friend nor the bearer of devastating news, but a professional working to build something meaningful. Thank you, May. We'll need everyone on board for what's ahead. The morning sun had reached its peak, streaming through the windows and illuminating the office space in harsh clarity. In the harsh light, the cracks in Jason's carefully constructed facade were visible to everyone. His designer suit couldn't hide the sweat staining his collar. His expensive watch couldn't disguise the tremor in his hands as he packed his awards and photographs. Ms. Chen, Gabrielle Martinez, a junior curator, approached with a handful of documents. I have some concerns about these acquisition strategies Mr. Reynolds implemented last month. The artist contracts seem— Bring them to my office in an hour, I interrupted gently. Everything will be reviewed and addressed. The fear in Gabriel's eyes was familiar. I'd seen it in my own reflection months ago, staring at mounting debt statements and forged signatures. But now that fear was being replaced by something else. Hope. Hope for change, for accountability, for a workplace built on integrity rather than intimidation. My phone buzzed with messages from other department heads, all eager to discuss the coming changes. Jason's power structure was crumbling, but unlike him, I wasn't interested in building a kingdom. I was here to build something far more valuable, a system of transparency, ethics, and genuine artistic growth. The transformation had begun, and there would be no going back to the old ways of doing business. The woman Jason had tried to destroy was now the architect of his professional reckoning, and every document, every signature, every transaction would be brought into the light. The next 48 hours at Luminance Gallery unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony of change. From my new corner office, I watched the ripple effects spread through every department. Jason had been relegated to a small workspace on the third floor, but his presence still lingered in the whispered conversations and furtive glances of employees who'd worked under his regime. My morning began with a steady stream of revelations. Gabrielle Martinez, the junior curator who'd approached me earlier, arrived with a stack of folders that told a story of systematic manipulation. These acquisition strategies, he explained, spreading documents across my desk. Mr. Reynolds would pressure us to approach artists at vulnerable moments, right after rejections from major exhibitions, during financial hardships. He called it strategic negotiation, but it was really predatory. His hands trembled slightly as he pointed out specific transactions. The commission rates for the gallery were excessive, but anyone who questioned it found themselves relegated to cataloging in the basement archives. How many other curators have similar stories, Gabriel? Most of us, he admitted. There's a whole drawer in his old filing cabinet labeled Special Opportunities. That's where he kept the documentation for his most aggressive acquisitions. I made a note to have security escort me through a thorough search of Jason's former office. Every drawer, every file, every post-it note could reveal another piece of his elaborate scheme. Through the glass walls, I spotted May heading toward my office, her expression urgent. The dynamic between us had shifted from personal friendship to professional alliance, something neither of us had anticipated. Olivia, she entered, closing the door behind her. The community outreach team just flagged something significant. Remember those educational programs Jason was so proud of? The ones that supposedly brought underserved communities into the gallery? She laid out a complex web of transactions, each one more questionable than the last. The same patterns I'd seen in our personal finances played out on an institutional scale, using grant money and donations intended for community programs to fund acquisitions that enhanced his professional reputation. "Get me everything you have on these programs," I instructed. "And May, have Catherine arrange an all-hands meeting for tomorrow morning. It's time to address the entire staff." As May left, I noticed Jason watching from the corridor, his new cotton shirt a far cry from his usual tailored suits. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw something flicker across his face. Not just anger, but fear. He knew what I was capable of finding. Victoria Lambert, the senior board member, stopped by unannounced. "The board is impressed with your initial findings," she said, settling into a visitor's chair. "But they're concerned about potential donor panic if this becomes public." "I have a plan for that too," I replied, pulling out another folder from my briefcase. "A complete donor communication strategy, emphasizing transparency and our commitment to correcting past mismanagement. Trust isn't built on hiding mistakes, Victoria. It's built on addressing them openly and implementing real change." She studied the proposal, nodding slowly. "You've thought of everything, haven't you? Quite different from the academic idealist," Jason described in his reports to the board. I smiled slightly, remembering his dismissive evaluations of my capabilities. People often mistake idealism for weakness. That's their mistake. By late afternoon, the office atmosphere had transformed. Employees who had once hurried past Jason's office with downcast eyes now walked confidently, sharing information freely. The culture of fear was being replaced by one of collaboration. Catherine Diaz arrived with the preliminary HR report. "We've had 13 employees come forward since this morning," she said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Verbal abuse, taking credit for others' work, professional sabotage." Jason's leadership style was even worse than we suspected. "Document everything," I instructed. "Every incident, every witness statement. The culture of silence ends now." Through my office windows, I could see the sun setting over the city skyline, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. The same view Jason had enjoyed while building his house of cards would now witness its dismantling. My phone buzzed with a message from Chairman Blackwell. "Board dinner tomorrow night. Bring your full findings. Time to discuss Phase 2. Jason's voice carried through the open door. He was arguing with someone by the elevators. "This is my exhibition. These are my artists. She has no right to—" "Your exhibition?" Gabriel's voice replied, stronger than I'd ever heard it. "You mean the exhibition you took credit for while the rest of us did the conceptual work? Those days are over, Mr. Reynolds." The exchange drew curious onlookers. Jason's face flushed, red as he realized his outburst had an audience. His attempt to intimidate had backfired, revealing his desperation instead. Security Chief Layla Santos appeared at my door. "Ms. Chen, we've secured the files from Mr. Reynolds' old office. You'll want to see this right away." The filing cabinet labeled Special Opportunities contained exactly what I'd expected. Evidence of Jason's systematic abuse of artistic trust. Each folder revealed another layer of manipulation, another breach of ethics, another example of how he'd used his position to serve his own interests. "Have these copied and secured," I instructed Santos, "and increase security presence on the 3rd floor. I suspect tomorrow's announcements might trigger some emotional responses." As the office emptied for the evening, I stood at my window, watching the city lights flicker to life. 6 months ago, I'd stood in my kitchen, staring at evidence of Jason's personal betrayal. Now I stood in his former office, surrounded by evidence of his professional ones. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. He'd underestimated me in both arenas, assuming my idealism was a weakness he could exploit. Instead, it had become the foundation of his downfall. My phone buzzed again, a text from my father. "Saw Luminance's press release about your appointment. So proud of you, Butterfly. show them what real leadership looks like. Tomorrow's all-hands meeting would change everything. The carefully gathered evidence, the testimonies, the documented patterns of abuse, all would be brought into the light. Jason's reign of manipulation was ending, but unlike him, I wasn't interested in building a power structure based on fear. Real strength, I'd learned, didn't come from intimidating others or exploiting their trust. It came from creating systems that empowered people to do their best work, from fostering an environment where integrity wasn't seen as weakness, but as the cornerstone of success. The night deepened, but lights still burned in offices throughout the building. Employees who had once rushed to leave at 5 now stayed late, eager to be part of the coming changes. Their dedication wasn't driven by fear of reprisals, but by genuine investment in transformation. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but tonight, watching the city gleam below, I allowed myself a moment to appreciate how far I'd come. The woman Jason had dismissed as too idealistic had become the architect of his professional reckoning, and her work was just beginning. The $350,000 debt he'd left me with had become an unexpected gift, a catalyst for uncovering not just his personal betrayal but his entire network of professional misconduct. Sometimes, I realized, the greatest strength comes not from avoiding pain, but from transforming it into purpose. As I prepared for tomorrow's all-hands meeting, my mind drifted back to the darkest day of my life, the day after Jason's betrayal was exposed. The memory was no longer painful, but it had shaped everything that followed. I'd woken up that morning to an empty house and a series of automated emails from our joint bank accounts. Insufficient funds. Payment declined. Account overdrawn. Each notification hammered home the reality of my situation. Jason hadn't just taken my trust. He'd systematically dismantled my financial security. Standing in our walk-in closet, I'd noticed the gaps where his expensive suits once hung. The safe in the back wall stood open and empty. He'd cleared out everything, including my grandmother's jade pendant that I'd stored there for safekeeping. Even in leaving, he'd found ways to wound. The kitchen counter was littered with past due notices I'd never seen before, bills for credit cards I didn't know existed, loan statements with my forged signature. Each document told the story of Jason's careful manipulation, his calculated betrayal. My phone had been buzzing constantly, Jason's colleagues and friends asking about rumors they'd heard. Jason, it seemed, was already controlling the narrative, telling anyone who would listen about his troubled marriage and how he'd finally found happiness. The breaking point came when I opened my laptop to check our investment accounts. Everything was gone. Our retirement savings, our emergency fund, even the money I'd been setting aside for my future studio space, all transferred out over the past months through a series of small transactions I'd never noticed. I'd collapsed. At the kitchen table, surrounded by evidence of my own blind trust. The woman staring back from the chrome refrigerator door looked broken, lost. That reflection became my turning point. With trembling hands, I'd pulled out a fresh legal pad and begun to write. Every transaction I could remember, every time Jason had dismissed my questions about our finances, every business trip that now seemed suspicious. The pattern emerged with devastating clarity. The doorbell rang. It was Natalie Okoye, my attorney friend from graduate school. I hadn't called her, but May must have reached out. Natalie took one look at the papers scattered across my kitchen and her professional demeanor took over. First, she'd said, pulling out her laptop, we document everything, then we fight back. Hour after hour, we traced the web of financial deceit. Jason had been methodical, starting small and gradually escalating. A credit card here, a personal loan there, always using my stellar credit score, always forging my signature with practiced ease. Olivia, Natalie had said gently, looking up from a particularly troubling document. This goes beyond personal finances. Some of these transactions, They look like the same patterns I've seen in art fraud cases. That statement had sparked something in my mind. I'd pulled up Luminance Gallery's public records, where Jason had recently been promoted to head curator. The similarities between his personal financial schemes and certain gallery acquisition patterns were impossible to ignore. "He's doing it there too," I'd whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. The same patterns, the same techniques, just on a larger scale. Natalie's expression had hardened. "Then that's our way in. Art fraud leaves a trail, Olivia. If he's using the same methods at work." We'd worked through the night, ordering takeout that grew cold as we built a case. Every document was scanned, every transaction logged, every pattern noted. By dawn, my dining room looked like a war room, with papers taped to walls and sticky notes creating a timeline of deception. The morning sun had streamed through the windows, illuminating the chaos of my disrupted life. But something else was illuminated too. A path forward. Jason had taught me more than he realized about financial manipulation. Now those lessons would become weapons in my arsenal. I'd showered and dressed in my best suit, the one Jason had always said was too severe for me. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The soft, trusting woman he'd married was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who understood that true strength comes from facing betrayal and choosing to rise above it. "What's the plan?" Natalie had asked, watching me gather the most damning documents into a portfolio. "First, we go to Luminance's board," I'd replied, my voice steady. "They need to know who they've put in charge of their artists and collections. Then we rebuild, not just my life, but every system he's corrupted." The next weeks had been a blur of legal meetings, credit agencies, and careful documentation. Each day revealed new depths to Jason's betrayal, but also showed me strengths I never knew I possessed. My attention to detail, my ability to spot patterns, my understanding of art market systems, all became tools for recovery. I'd withdrawn from social activities, focusing every spare moment on building my case. Friends left concerned voicemails, not understanding that I was engaged in the fight of my life. Jason had counted on my silence, on my shame. He'd expected me to crumble under the weight of his betrayal. Instead, I'd turned that weight into foundation stones, building a new future from the ruins of his deception. Every document I uncovered, every pattern I traced, brought me closer to not just recovery, but transformation. The day I'd finally presented my findings to Luminance's board had been surreal. I'd walked into their executive boardroom not as a victim seeking justice, but as a professional exposing systemic fraud. My personal connection to Jason was almost secondary to the evidence I'd gathered of his professional misconduct. Now, standing in my new office at Luminance, those memories felt distant yet crucial. The pain of betrayal had forged something unexpected. A leader who understood both the mechanics of artistic manipulation and the importance of ethical oversight. Tomorrow's all-hands meeting wouldn't just expose Jason's misconduct. It would lay the groundwork for a new institutional culture, one built on transparency, accountability, and the understanding that true strength comes not from exploiting others' trust, but from earning and maintaining it. My phone buzzed with a text from Natalie. "Saw the gallery announcement. From victim to director in 6 months. Not bad for someone too idealistic for business." I smiled, remembering Jason's words from that devastating night. He'd been right. About one thing. I had been too trusting, too idealistic. But he'd failed to understand that idealism, when tempered by betrayal and fortified by purpose, could become an unshakable kind of strength. The sun had set fully now, leaving the city, sparkling below. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but I was ready. The woman Jason had tried to destroy had instead been transformed, and his carefully constructed world of artistic manipulation was about to meet its match. The early morning light filtered through the windows of my office as I reviewed the final preparations for the all-hands meeting. The past 6 months hadn't just been about gathering evidence, they'd been a calculated journey of transformation. After my initial presentation to Luminance's board, I'd thrown myself into an intensive study of art market ethics and curatorial best practices. My dining room had become a makeshift war room, walls covered with auction records and artist contracts. Every night I worked until exhaustion forced me to stop, then started again at dawn. My first breakthrough came when I connected with Dr. Isabel Morales, an art law specialist focusing on artist rights. She'd taken one look at my evidence and recognized the patterns immediately. Classic exploitation, she'd explained, spreading the documents across her desk. He used his position of authority to pressure vulnerable artists, just like he did with you. But you've caught something many investigators miss: the parallel patterns between personal and institutional manipulation. Together, we'd spent weeks building an airtight case. Isabel taught me the intricacies of art law, while I shared my intimate knowledge of Jason's manipulation techniques. Every acquisition was scrutinized, every pattern documented, every artist agreement examined for irregularities. "Your attention to detail is remarkable," Isabel had commented one late night as we traced a particularly complex series of transactions. Most people would have missed these subtle connections. What she didn't know was that each discovery fueled my determination. Every fraudulent agreement I uncovered represented someone else's creative work exploited, someone else's artistic career compromised. The $350,000 debt Jason had left me with became almost insignificant compared to the damage he'd done to emerging artists through his gallery practices. I'd also reached out to Marcus Way, a renowned arts administrator who'd made headlines exposing acquisition fraud at major institutions. His insights proved invaluable in developing my proposal for Luminance's restructuring. "The problem isn't just individual bad actors," Marcus had explained during our first meeting. "It's systems that enable them. You need to rebuild from the ground up." Following his guidance, I'd immersed myself in studying institutional ethics and equitable arts administration. Every free moment was devoted to learning contract law, grant compliance, artist advocacy, organizational psychology. Jason had assumed my idealism was a weakness, never realizing it would enable me to understand and address the human cost of artistic exploitation. The transformation wasn't just professional. I'd sold most of the art collection Jason and I had shared, using the proceeds to start repaying the fraudulent debts he'd left in my name. My new apartment was smaller but felt cleaner somehow, unburdened by memories of betrayal. Natalie had helped me rebuild my financial foundation from scratch. "You're not just surviving this," she'd said, watching me methodically work through each creditor. "You're creating a blueprint for others to follow." The hiring process at Luminance had been intense. 5 interviews, multiple presentations, detailed background checks. But with each round, I'd grown more confident. The board wasn't just hiring someone to catch a fraudster. They were bringing in a leader who understood both the mechanics of manipulation and the importance of prevention. I'd also spent time building relationships with key personnel at Luminance, particularly those who'd worked directly under Jason. Catherine Diaz in HR had been especially helpful, sharing insights into the toxic culture he'd created. "It wasn't just artistic manipulation," she'd confided during one of our early meetings. "He created an environment of fear and silence. Anyone who questioned his methods found themselves isolated or pushed out." That information had shaped my restructuring plan. Beyond just financial oversight, I'd developed comprehensive protocols for employee protection and ethical reporting. The culture of fear would be replaced by one of transparency and collaboration. May's role in all this had been unexpected. After her initial revelation about Jason's betrayal, she'd thrown herself into gathering evidence of his professional misconduct. Her position in community outreach had given her access to crucial documentation. "I know I can never fully make you understand how sorry I am that I didn't come forward sooner," she'd said during one late-night planning session. "But I can help ensure he never does this to anyone else." The week before my official start date, I'd conducted anonymous surveys among Luminance's curatorial staff. The responses painted a picture of systematic intimidation and ethical compromise. Junior curators described being pressured to mislead artists about sales prices. Administrative staff reported covering up questionable acquisition practices under threat of termination. Each piece of evidence, each testimony, each documented pattern had become part of a larger strategy. Jason had built his empire on fear and manipulation. I would dismantle it through transparency and reform. I'd also taken time to understand Luminance's legitimate operations, its market position, its potential for positive impact, its role in the artistic ecosystem. This wasn't just about exposing fraud, it was about transforming an institution into what it could and should be. The preparation hadn't been solely professional. I'd worked with a therapist to process the personal trauma of Jason's betrayal, turning emotional wounds into sources of insight and strength. The woman who had once trusted blindly now understood the delicate balance between vision and vigilance. Physical transformation played its part too. Gone were the soft, approachable outfits Jason had always encouraged me to wear. My new wardrobe was chosen for authority and presence, armor for the institutional battlefield I was about to enter. Now, reviewing the final details for the all-hands meeting, I could appreciate how each step of the journey had been necessary. The late nights analyzing documents, the weekends studying art law, the hours practicing presentations, all had prepared me for what was to come. My phone buzzed with a message from Isabel. Just reviewed your final presentation. They won't know what hit them. Remember, you're not just exposing fraud, you're setting a new standard. She was right. This wasn't about revenge, it was about revolution. Jason had taught me more than he realized about the mechanics of artistic manipulation. Now those lessons would become the foundation for systematic change. The sun had fully risen, painting the city in morning light. In a few hours, the office would fill with employees who'd worked under Jason's regime of fear. By day's end, they would understand that a new era was beginning. I straightened my desk, ensuring every document was in place for the upcoming revelations. The journey from betrayed wife to institutional reformer had been intense but necessary. Jason had dismissed me as too idealistic for business, never understanding that true strength comes in many forms. The woman who had once trusted blindly now carried the power to transform an entire cultural institution. The preparation was complete. The time for change had arrived. The Luminance Gallery Conference Center buzzed with nervous energy as employees filed in for the all-hands meeting. Through the glass doors, I could see Jason settled into his usual spot in the front row, still carrying himself with an air of authority despite his recent demotion. He had no idea that the next hour would dismantle everything he'd built. Chairman Blackwell opened the session precisely at 9 a.m. Good morning, everyone. Today marks a significant transition for Luminance Gallery. Ms. Chen will lead us through some important changes in our acquisitions and exhibitions operations. I took the podium, surveying the sea of faces before me. Junior curators who'd been pressured to compromise their ethics, administrative staff who'd been forced to cover questionable transactions, senior staff who'd looked the other way. Each person in this room had been affected by Jason's toxic leadership. 3 months ago, I began, my voice steady and clear. I presented the board with evidence of systematic misconduct within our modern collections department. Today, you'll understand why changes were necessary and how we move forward. The first slide appeared on the massive screen behind me, a complex web of transactions that had taken weeks to unravel. This chart represents artist payments over the past 24 months. Notice these patterns of delayed compensation, each approved. Under questionable circumstances, Jason's posture stiffened. He recognized these transactions. They were his signature methods, now exposed in vivid detail. Mr. Martinez, I called out to the junior curator who'd first brought concerns to my attention. Could you explain what happened when you questioned these acquisition strategies? Gabriel stood, his voice initially shaky but growing stronger. I was told to either follow the established protocols or find another position. Mr. Reynolds said questioning his methods would be career suicide. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Other curators began nodding, recognition dawning on their faces. This culture of intimidation ends today, I announced, clicking to the next slide. We've documented 37 instances of ethical violations, ranging from pressure tactics to direct manipulation of artist contracts. The screen filled with evidence, emails, altered documents, forged signatures, each piece meticulously gathered and verified. Jason's face grew increasingly pale as his methods were laid bare. Ms. Chen, he interrupted, standing abruptly. These were all approved acquisitions. Every transaction followed gallery protocols. Protocols you manipulated. I cut in, bringing up the next set of documents. Let's discuss the special opportunities files found in your office. The room fell silent as I detailed how artists had been pressured to accept below-market rates, how documentation had been altered, how intimidation had been applied to silence questions. This isn't just about financial misconduct, I continued, nodding to Catherine Diaz. Human Resources has collected extensive evidence of systematic intimidation and harassment. Catherine stood, her professional demeanor masking the anger I knew she felt. We've received 13 formal complaints in the past week alone. Employees were threatened with negative references if they raised concerns about Mr. Reynolds' methods. Jason's carefully maintained facade began to crack. This is ridiculous, he sputtered. A witch hunt orchestrated by your ex-wife. I finished for him, my voice level. That's what you were going to say, isn't it? Let's address that directly. The next slide showed personal financial documents, the fraudulent loans and credit cards he'd taken out in my name. Mr. Reynolds' methods weren't limited to professional manipulation. His pattern of financial fraud began with personal relationships, perfected through intimate betrayal, then scaled up to institutional level. May stood up from her seat. I can confirm these patterns. As both a personal witness to Mr. Reynolds' manipulation and a staff member, I've seen how he used the same techniques to exploit trust in both spheres. Jason's face contorted with rage. You're both just bitter about discovering your fraud? I interrupted. About exposing your manipulation? This isn't about personal grievances, Jason. This is about systematic abuse of trust and position. The next hour unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony of revelation. Each piece of the evidence, each testimony, each documented violation built upon the last. Department heads stepped forward to share what they'd discovered in their own divisions. Employees began raising hands, offering their own experiences of intimidation and coercion. Jason's kingdom of fear was crumbling in real time, each brick of his carefully constructed facade falling away to reveal the rot beneath. Moving forward, I announced, bringing up the restructuring plan. Every aspect of our acquisitions operations will be transformed. New oversight protocols, transparent. Artist contracts and ethical acquisition guidelines are just the beginning. The energy in the room shifted as I outlined the changes. Fear gave way to hope as employees realized they were being offered not just protection, but empowerment. Every person in this room has a role in our transformation, I continued. Your insights, your concerns, your suggestions, all will be heard and valued. The era of silence and intimidation is over. I clicked to the final slide, displaying the new organizational structure. Effective immediately, all acquisitions will undergo multi-level review. Artist communications will be transparent and documented. Every employee will have direct access to reporting resources without fear of retaliation. Jason stood again, his expensive suit no longer able to mask his desperation. The board can't possibly... The board fully supports these changes, Chairman Blackwell interrupted, stepping forward. In fact, Ms. Chen's restructuring plan has become a model for our international satellite galleries. The room erupted in questions, but they weren't directed at Jason anymore. Employees turned to me, eager to understand their roles in the new system, hungry for the chance to work with integrity again. As the meeting concluded, Jason remained rooted to his spot, watching his influence evaporate. The power he'd built through fear was being replaced by something stronger, authentic leadership based on transparency and trust. Mr. Reynolds, I addressed him directly, you'll find your new assignment details waiting at your desk. Your artist? Relationships are being redistributed pending full audit. He stared at me, finally seeing not the woman he'd dismissed as too idealistic, but the leader who'd outmaneuvered him at every turn. You won't get away with this, he muttered, but his words carried no weight anymore. I already have, I replied quietly. The difference is I'm doing it legally and ethically. As employees filed out, many stopped to shake my hand or share their relief at the changes. The transformation wasn't just organizational. It was personal for every person who'd suffered under Jason's regime. Catherine appeared at my side. Security is ready to escort Mr. Reynolds to his new position. It has already restricted his system access. I nodded, watching Jason's retreating figure. The man who'd once dominated this institution with fear now walked alone, his power stripped. Away not through manipulation but through truth. The sunlight streamed through the conference center windows, illuminating a room that felt somehow cleaner, lighter. The weight of secrets and fear had been replaced by the possibility of genuine change. My phone buzzed, a message from Isabel. Just watch the live stream. Masterful execution. This is how real institutional reform happens. The climactic moment I'd spent months preparing for had arrived and passed, but the real work was just beginning. Transforming an institutional culture takes more than exposing wrongdoing. It requires building something better in its place. Looking at the eager faces around me, I knew we were ready for that challenge. Jason had taught me more than he realized about the mechanics of power. Now those lessons would fuel not revenge, but revolution. The hours following the all-hands meeting passed in a whirlwind of activity. The 5th floor of Luminance Gallery had transformed into a hub of purposeful energy, each department adapting to the seismic shifts in institutional culture. Gabriel had organized an impromptu gathering of junior curators in one of the meeting rooms. Through the glass walls, I could see them reviewing artist contracts, identifying questionable agreements that needed immediate attention. Their faces showed a mixture of determination and relief, finally free to voice their concerns without fear of retaliation. Ms. Chen, Catherine appeared at my office door. We've had 19 additional employees come forward in the past hour alone, each with documented evidence of Jason's misconduct. I gestured for her to take a seat, noting how the office dynamics had already begun to shift. Employees who had once scurried past this corner office now walked with confidence, making eye contact, sharing information freely. There's something else, Catherine continued, pulling out a thick folder. We found his private personnel evaluation. Files, the real ones, not the sanitized versions he submitted to HR. He kept detailed notes on every employee, personal information, creative vulnerabilities, anything he could use as leverage. The folder contained years of calculated manipulation. Jason had treated his department like a personal fiefdom, collecting ammunition against anyone who might challenge his authority. Each page revealed another layer of his systematic abuse of power. Get these to legal immediately, I instructed. And Catherine, set up a support system for affected employees. They'll need resources to process this. Through my office windows, I spotted Jason being escorted to his new position on the 3rd floor. His designer suit looked somehow ill-fitting now, his confident stride reduced to a shuffle. Security Chief Santos followed at a discreet distance, ensuring the transition remained peaceful. May knocked softly before entering, her arms full of outreach reports. The community programs team is already finding discrepancies in his public engagement initiatives. Some of these educational programs, they never actually happened. They just existed on paper. Start with the grant-funded programs. Directed, remembering how Jason had targeted vulnerable community organizations. Those need to be properly implemented first. The afternoon brought a steady stream of revelations. Victoria Lambert arrived with news from other arts institutions. "They're finding similar patterns," she reported, settling into a chair. "Jason's methods apparently inspired some imitators. The board wants to implement your oversight protocols, industry-wide." Each hour seemed to uncover new depths to Jason's manipulation. Department heads reported discovering hidden files, altered records, evidence of systematic intimidation. But alongside each revelation came signs of positive change. I watched as Lin Wei, a previously quiet exhibitions coordinator, confidently presented her installation concept to her team. Months ago, such initiative would have been punished. Now it was celebrated. Ms. Chen, Gabriel reappeared, his earlier nervousness replaced by professional purpose. "We've identified the artists most significantly underpaid. The team is ready to begin restructuring their contracts following the new compensation guidelines." The transformation wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal for every employee who'd suffered under Jason's regime. I noticed people gathering in small groups, sharing stories they'd been afraid to tell before, supporting colleagues who were just beginning to process their experiences. My phone buzzed with messages from art world contacts. Word of the changes at Luminance was spreading fast. Jason's reputation in the arts community was crumbling as quickly as his institutional empire had. "They found something in the storage archives," Catherine reported, returning with another file. A drawer of artist contracts, the original versions, before he altered them to reduce compensation rates. The discovery painted an even clearer picture of Jason's methods. He hadn't just manipulated finances. He'd built an elaborate web of altered documents and false promises, using fear to maintain his position. As evening approached, I called another brief meeting with the department heads. The conference room felt different now, energized rather than tense, collaborative rather than competitive. "The immediate changes are just the beginning," I explained, outlining the next phases of our transformation. "Every process, every policy, every aspect of our operations will be rebuilt with transparency and ethics at its core." Marcus Wei, now officially appointed as our ethics officer, nodded in agreement. "The culture shift is already visible. People are speaking up, asking questions, challenging questionable practices." Through the glass walls, I could see Jason in his new workspace, staring at his computer screen. The man who had once dominated this institution through fear now sat isolated, his power stripped away not through manipulation but through truth. "Ms. Chen," Elena from HR appeared with another update. "We've had requests from several employees for professional ethics training. They want to learn how to identify and prevent similar situations in the future." The request spoke volumes about the changing culture. Employees weren't just accepting new policies, they were actively seeking ways to maintain and strengthen them. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the office floor, I took a moment to observe the transformation. Departments that had once competed now collaborated. Information flowed freely where secrets had once festered. Trust was slowly replacing fear. My phone lit up with a message from Natalie. "Saw the gallery announcement about the restructuring. From victim to reformer, you've turned his betrayal into a blueprint for change." The irony wasn't lost on me. Jason's attempts to destroy me had instead created someone stronger, not just personally, but professionally. The skills I'd developed uncovering his fraud had become tools for institutional reform. Catherine returned with one final report for the day. Security did a sweep of his old storage areas. They found documentation of every artist he'd exploited over the years. Some of these people, their careers were derailed because they tried to speak up. Contact them, I instructed. Let them know what's happening here. Offer them a chance to exhibit if they wish. As the office quieted for the evening, I stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker to life. The day's events had set irreversible changes in motion. Jason's carefully constructed system of manipulation was being dismantled piece by piece. My phone buzzed again, a message from Chairman Blackwell. The board is impressed with today's execution. Your approach to institutional reform is exactly what the art world needed. The woman Jason had dismissed as too idealistic had become the architect of his professional downfall. But more importantly, she had become a catalyst for genuine change. The $350,000 debt he'd left me with had become seed money for something priceless: the transformation of an entire institutional culture. Looking out over the city skyline, I allowed myself a moment to appreciate the magnitude of the day's changes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, watching the lights, below I knew we had crossed a threshold. The era of fear and manipulation was ending, replaced by something stronger: leadership based on integrity and trust. The immediate impact of our changes was already visible, but the real transformation was just beginning. Jason had taught me more than he realized about the mechanics of power. Now, those lessons would fuel not just reform, but revolution. 1 month into my leadership at Luminance Gallery, the changes had rippled far beyond our initial expectations. The 5th floor had undergone a physical and cultural metamorphosis that reflected our new institutional philosophy. The intimidating dark wood paneling of the executive suite had been replaced with glass partitions, creating an environment of literal transparency. Jason's former Special Opportunities office, once a place where he'd pressured artists into unfavorable contracts, had been transformed into a collaborative workspace where teams freely shared ideas and concerns. "The quarterly numbers are in," Victoria announced during our morning executive meeting. "Artist satisfaction up 58%, employee retention increased by 65%, and our ethically acquired collections are attracting more visitors than traditional exhibitions by a significant margin." The statistics told only part of the story. The real transformation was visible in the daily interactions and atmosphere throughout the building. Junior curators who had once lived in fear now confidently presented their findings. Administrative staff who had been forced to cover up questionable transactions now led initiatives for process improvement. Gabriel, once terrified of questioning authority, had emerged as a leader in our new artist relations team. "We've renegotiated over 40 unfair contracts," he reported, spreading documents across my desk. "The artists are actually thanking us for the transparency." The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating a workspace that bore little resemblance to Jason's era of darkness. Every corner of the office now housed small groups of employees engaged in open discussion, sharing insights and building upon each other's ideas. "Ms. Chen," Catherine appeared with her daily update. "The ethics hotline has recorded 0 complaints this week. Instead, we're getting suggestions for improvement and requests for additional training." The transformation extended beyond our department. Other arts institutions had begun adopting our transparency protocols. The culture of fear that Jason had cultivated was being replaced by one of collaboration and mutual respect. May, now heading our enhanced community engagement team, had implemented a revolutionary artist support system. "Every exhibition proposal is now fully documented and explained," she demonstrated. "Artists have real-time access to their sales, details, and commission structures." From my office, I could see Jason in his new position on the 3rd floor. His designer suits had given way to business-casual attire. His commanding presence diminished to that of any other employee. The man who had once ruled through intimidation now experienced firsthand the environment he'd created. "The board is impressed with the transformation," Chairman Blackwell commented during our weekly meeting. "Your approach to institutional reform is becoming a model for other galleries and museums." The changes weren't just internal. Art publications had begun featuring articles about Luminance's revolutionary approach to artist relationships. Our transparency initiatives were being studied by other institutions looking to reform their own practices. Lin Wei, our previously quiet exhibitions coordinator, had developed an innovative system for ensuring fair artist representation. "It's based on the patterns we discovered in Jason's operations," she explained. "By understanding how manipulation works, we can better prevent it." The physical transformation of the gallery continued as well. The intimidating corner offices had been converted into artist meeting spaces. The hierarchical layout that had once separated management from staff had been replaced by an open floor plan that encouraged interaction and communication. "You need to see this," Catherine said, bringing in another report. "Employee satisfaction? Surveys show a complete reversal from 6 months ago. People actually look forward to coming to work now." Through the glass walls, I watched as teams gathered for their morning meetings. The nervous glances and fearful postures of Jason's era had been replaced by engaged discussions and confident presentations. Ms. Chen, Elena from HR, appeared, with more updates. "We've had 27 applications for internal promotions this week alone. People who were afraid to advance under the old system are now stepping forward. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Some employees, conditioned by years of toxic leadership, struggled to adapt to an environment of transparency and accountability. We'd implemented support systems and training programs to help them transition. It's not just about changing policies," I explained during a leadership workshop. "It's about healing the trauma of systematic manipulation and rebuilding trust from the ground up." My phone buzzed with a message from Isabel. "Your institutional reform model is being discussed in academic circles. Several universities have requested case studies on implementing similar changes." The afternoon brought a visit from a team of Arts Foundation representatives. Instead of the tense scrutiny that had characterized past inspections, they found an institution eager to demonstrate its commitment to ethical practices. "This is unprecedented," the lead inspector commented, reviewing our new oversight protocols. "You've created systems that make manipulation virtually impossible while improving artistic outcomes." Through my office windows, I spotted Jason, attempting to navigate the new collaborative environment. His old tactics of intimidation fell flat in a workspace designed for transparency. The man who had once dominated through fear now struggled to contribute meaningfully to team discussions. "There's something you should see," May said, entering with a stack of files. "Remember those community programs Jason claimed were failures? We've completely restructured them. The community engagement levels are actually setting new institutional records." The transformation had extended to our artist relationships as well. Instead of the high-pressure tactics Jason had advocated, we now focused on education and transparent communication. Artists were partners in their exhibition processes, fully informed of both opportunities and obligations. "Your story is inspiring others," Catherine mentioned, sharing an arts journal. "Other professionals who faced similar betrayals are speaking up, pushing for reform in their own institutions." As evening approached, I stood by the window, observing the bustling gallery below. The woman Jason had tried to destroy had instead become a catalyst for industry-wide change. His betrayal, meant to break me, had instead created something powerful, a model for institutional reform based on integrity and transparency. My phone lit up with a message from Natalie. "Saw your interview in Art Forum. From personal debt to cultural revolution, you've turned trauma into transformation." The sunset painted the city skyline in shades of gold, reflecting off the glass walls that now symbolized our commitment to transparency. Jason's legacy of fear was being systematically replaced by something stronger, an institutional culture built on trust, ethics, and mutual respect. Chairman Blackwell appeared at my door. The board wants to implement your reform model across all our international locations. Your experience with manipulation has given you unique insights into preventing it. The transformation continued to unfold, each day bringing new evidence of positive change. The $350,000 debt Jason had left me with had become seed money for a revolution in institutional culture. His attempt to destroy me had instead created someone capable of rebuilding not just a department, but an entire approach to arts administration. As the gallery lights dimmed for the evening, I reflected on how far we'd come. The broader transformation wasn't just about exposing past wrongs, it was about creating systems that prevented future ones. Jason had taught me the mechanics of manipulation. I had used that knowledge to build safeguards against it. The woman he'd dismissed as too idealistic had transformed his tactics of destruction into tools for positive change. The journey from victim to reformer had created something lasting, a model for institutional ethics that put artistic integrity at its core. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.